This lesson is centered on how Rome began to expand, but then eventually how the government system of the Republic collapsed and it was replaced by a dictatorship. And that happens under the rule of Julius Caesar, who we'll talk about his life and times extensively in this lesson today. Let's begin with talking about how the Republic collapses. What was going on is that Rome was increasing its wealth and expanding its boundaries, bringing in many different groups and different nationalities, but also collecting a lot of taxes. That actually created a lot of problems, to be honest with you, because there was a growing discontent between the wealthy and the poor. And then there was a breakdown in military order as people started to spread and expand out in the outskirts of what is now Europe. Capital letter B, we'll talk about some of the economic turmoil that was going on. By 100 BC, about a third of Rome's population was made up of slaves. So small farmers were really struggling to keep up because they were trying to produce crops with paying, farmers and workers on their land, and they had to charge more for the goods because they were actually paying workers, whereas you had these very large farming estates that were run by slaves where you may have to, if you're a Roman farmer that owns one of these large estates, you may have to pay for a slave a one-time fee, but then over the course of time, you're basically making a lot of money off of that person's work. Therefore, their prices for the goods were a little bit cheaper because they could afford to charge less or fewer denarius, or the coin, because they were producing so much more than the small farmers. So what happened is that these small farmers eventually joined the ranks of the urban poor. So they became city folk, and they became very, very unfortunate, and they had very limited chance for expansion in other fields. There were two brothers named Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. They were tribunes. They were elected by the plebeians to support them and defend their voting rights. And they did do that, but eventually they were killed for going against the ways of the patricians. We also have military problems. As the Republic grew more unstable, these economic problems, military generals began to seize more power for themselves. And then these military commanders began to recruit poor folks to join their armies. And these poor people from the plebeian class, they began to fight for pay. And so they owed allegiance only to their commander. The problem with this is that if you're a Roman army, you would like your people fighting in the army to show allegiance to Rome. Well, the newly recruited poor, they only know, hey, this commander is paying me. This commander is giving me loot. This commander is giving me a home. This commander is now supporting my family. My allegiances are going to go to him only. And if he tells me that our army is going to march against the emperor or against the consuls, then I'm certainly going to go right along because this is where I'm getting my money. And that's kind of a major problem that was going on, not once, not twice, but, at different intervals throughout this time period. This is going to change a little bit with the role of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was a military leader. He took control of Rome in 60 BC as an elected consul. Caesar was assisted by Crassus, who was a wealthy Roman, and another general named Pompey. This formed what's called a triumvirate. So it changes the scope of the Roman Republic. It became a group of three rulers. Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus began to dominate Rome as a triumvirate for about 10 years. Caesar actually only served the traditional one-year term as consul. He then went on to govern the region of Gaul, which is modern-day France. At that time, it was a Roman province. He led his legions, which are groups of 5,000 soldiers, to conquer all of Gaul, and then won the loyalty of his men by actually fighting in those battles right alongside of them. Pompey, at this time, actually became jealous of Caesar and became his political rival. He urged the Senate to force Caesar's army disbanded and force him to return home. The Senate did order this, but Caesar defied the Senate's order, and in 49 BC, he did a famous move by calling it the crossing of the Rubicon River in Italy. This was significant because the Senate basically ordered that he not do this with his army and said he should come back alone, and he brought his army across. So it was a direct insubordination of the Senate. And Caesar's troops then began to battle with Pompey's troops all throughout Roman territory in Greece, Asia, Egypt, and Spain. All of these battles resulted in wins for Caesar, and in 46 BC, Caesar returned to Rome with the support of the army and the support of the masses. And so therefore the Senate appointed him dictator for life, which totally changed the scope of the Roman Republic. It was basically gone. Let's talk about some of the things that Caesar did as a dictator. He governed as an absolute ruler. He started a number of reforms. For example, granting citizenship to people of the provinces, expanding the Senate to include plebeians, created jobs for the poor, gave the poor land in new colonies, and increased pay for soldiers. So he's trying to solve some of those economic problems with some of his reforms. Many senators and nobles became concerned over the level of power and popularity that Caesar had accumulated, and a number of senators led by Marcus Brutus and Gaius Cassius, two friends of Caesar, by the way, plotted his assassination. In 44 BC, he was stabbed to death in the Senate chamber halls. He was assassinated by his own friends in the Senate. Point number 11 points at the beginning of the empire. There's going to be a second triumvirate which comes into play, and this is an alliance of three of Caesar's supporters. They came together to rule Rome in 43 BC. They were Octavian, also known as Augustus. He was the adopted son of Caesar. He's actually his nephew in real life. The second was Mark Antony, a military general who would eventually have an affair with Cleopatra. And then the third was Lepidus, who was a wealthy politician. This triumvirate, like the first one, ended in jealousy, and Octavian's forces basically were powerful. Mark Antony's forces were powerful. Those two are going to be the big players here. Octavian basically kind of asks Lepidus to retire, forces him out, and so then he and Mark Antony become rivals. Mark Antony met Queen Cleopatra while he was in Anatolia, leading troops there against the enemies. He fell in love with her, and he went back to Egypt with her. Octavian accused Mark Antony of trying to rule Rome through Egypt, and then those two went to civil war. Octavian actually defeated the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra at a famous naval battle called the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Later, Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide together, dual suicide. It's kind of a story, Shakespearean story there. Not sure how it all went down in history because it was behind closed doors in palaces and temples. But Octavian then becomes the unchallenged ruler of Rome and became known as Augustus, which means the exalted one, which means somebody who's been through all of the fire and then came out victorious and unscathed. So this is the start of the Roman Empire, in which was ruled by only one man, and that first emperor was, of course, Octavian Augustus. Roman numeral 2 is going to talk about how this begins to expand again. Rome was at its peak of power from the beginning of Augustus's rule in 27 BC all the way to 180 AD. This was a time period of 207 years of peace, and this is called the Pox Romana, which means the Roman peace. During the Pox Romana, the empire covered over 3 million square miles. The population was between 60 and 80 million, and the population of the city of Rome itself was over 1 million. So some major moves going on in the power of Rome. A sound government was established under Augustus. He began to stabilize the Roman government by patrolling the frontiers, by glorifying Rome with public buildings, kind of like what Pericles did in Athens, and creating a system of civil service. A civil service is where you pay workers to manage the affairs of government, such as things like the grain supply, collecting taxes, and also a postal system, which the Romans had. They had a mailing and messaging system. Capital letter C is going to talk about agriculture and trade. About 90% of the population was engaged in farming. Coins, which were called the denarius, were common as a coinage system throughout the empire. Rome traded by shipping goods protected by the Roman Navy. Who were they protecting from? Pirates. Pirates along the Mediterranean. Today we know of pirates in the Caribbean. It's a famous movie, but these type of things were real, especially in the Mediterranean Sea. There were all kinds of pirates trying to steal goods and battle the ships of the Romans. Cities such as Corinth of Greece, Ephesus of Anatolia, and Antioch on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea became wealthy trading posts. Rome also traded with China and India. And the Romans were well known for being great road builders. The original purpose of Roman roads was to advance troops in a more expedited fashion, but eventually they became standard modes of transportation. Roman numeral 3 talks about the Roman world, slaves and captivity. Slaves were taken as men, women, and even children from captives of the military campaigns by the Roman military. They were bought and sold as property of their owners. Some strong and healthy males were actually forced to become gladiators or professional fighters who fought to the death in public contests. Some of those contests happened in the Colosseum, which is a famous stadium of the Roman Empire. Capital B is going to talk about religion, gods and goddesses. Early Romans worshiped powerful spirits or divine forces that they called noumena. They thought that these noumena or spirits resided in everything around them. They also had lares, which were spirits that were the guardians of each family. In Roman government and religion were linked. One of the things about this is that when you take a look at government and religion being combined, that means that you actually had to worship the emperor and you had to honor the gods and goddesses in public and also in private sectors. This is why early Christians in Rome had such a hard time. They were not willing to follow these rules. They were going to worship the one God and Jesus Christ, and they were punished severely with their lives for that. Capital letter C, we'll talk about society and culture. Social status and wealth had a huge impact on how people lived. If you were wealthy, you had a much better situation, obviously. Although much of the population in Rome was very poor, the government actually supported the poor by providing them with grain or bread and housed them in what are called tenements. It's like very small, compact apartment buildings, very small rooms, mostly one room dwellings. To distract and control the poor masses, the government also provided free entertainment such as games, races, mock battles in the Colosseum, and gladiator contests at the Colosseum, which was, as we said before, a huge arena. It held around 50,000 people.